What is up, guys? Welcome back to Overspray. So today we are working on the roof of the car once again. Now this is actually the night after I've already epoxied the roof of the Honda Civic, and I'll go ahead and show you what that actually looks like right now. Alrighty guys, so as you guys can see, this is how the epoxy ended up laying out. This epoxy, I gotta say, laid down super nice and smooth, but unfortunately, we still have some dents under that epoxy primer that we're gonna need to take care of. Now, I sprayed the epoxy primer because this roof was basically bare metal. The whole thing was bare metal, and well, we need a way to protect that metal. So we're gonna go ahead and take care of those dents and any other defect that we have on the roof. There's also some other defects as well. Basically, when I sprayed the epoxy primer, I wasn't able to get the seal far back enough, and well, there's some bare metal still showing under those moldings, so we're gonna end up having to spray more primer to protect those bare metal spots. Also, the body filler that we're going to be using in this video, normally I like to use the U-POL Fantastic Body Filler. The part number is UP0920, and I'm also going to be using the USC Pro Glaze. This is my glaze of choice anytime I'm doing anything with glaze. Now, this glaze is advertised to be pinhole free, but as you guys will see later in the video, I ended up getting pinholes with this glaze. Now, I'm not sure if this was probably a mixing problem, or I really can't tell you why I got pinholes, because normally with this Pro Glaze, I get 0 pinholes unless the glaze is just no longer any good. Yeah, I couldn't figure out why I ended up getting pinholes. But anyway, that's for later on. I'll show you everything. But for now, let's go ahead and pull in the Civic and get straight to work. So one thing I like to do to identify all of my dents, I like to identify them with masking tape. So I'll end up putting a little piece of masking tape on all the defects that I see in the primer. This could not, it's not only for dents, it could be for any type of defect. It could be a fisheye, could be a piece of hair, could be, you name it. Basically, I'll put a piece of tape there to identify that as a defect. And that way, I could pretty much see them very, very easily, and also identify them by size. So if I have a small piece of tape, that's basically a small defect, and vice versa. Now you could also see that I got a little pieces of dust in my primer. Those will be taped as a small defect, but I'll basically just nib them out. I also have 4 little dents here in the front that need to get taken care of, and usually instead of just going one by one and filling in these little small dents, I'll just go ahead and cover the whole area and then go ahead and sand it flat, and that way you take care of a bunch of different dents all at once. And I'll do basically the same thing here on the back. As you guys can see, there's quite a few defects and dents here in this area. So like I said, I'll just cover this whole area with glaze or body filler, depending on the depth of the damage. If it needs a lot of filling, then I'll use body filler, but if it's just very minor stuff, I'll just go ahead and use the glaze. And basically that is my tactic. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I like to do is go ahead and tape off any little edge that I see where I'm going to end up putting body filler. The reason why I do this is because when you go and lay down body filler, especially in these small narrow areas, what's going to end up happening is your body filler is actually going to end up going into the cracks of the body, or in this case, where the separation between the body of the car and the sunroof meet. There's basically going to be a gap there, and what's going to end up happening is body filler will actually end up going in there. So what I like to do is just put tape in there, just so that when I go and put body filler, I can basically just peel the tape off and it'll end up leaving a nice and clean edge. Now here I'm actually denibbing any of the small little defects that I see. I will end up putting body filler on them, but I'm also just nibbing out any of those little small imperfections, and then we're going to go ahead and take care of some of those very, very tiny dents. Now, I did go ahead and sand most of the small dents just to make sure that I'm getting a good adhesion in those small little areas. Yeah, so that's how we're gonna end up doing it. As you guys can see here, I went ahead and I've already applied some glaze on top of it, but later on, I found out that the glaze is just not doing a good job on covering some of those dents. So on the bigger dents, I ended up just using my body filler. Like I said, body filler is mainly used for the bigger, deeper dents, whereas glaze, it might just be more of pinhole filling and smaller defects or very, very tiny little dents as well. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just go around, apply some glaze on those areas, and continue on working. Alrighty guys, so tonight is the next night after the big thunderstorm last night. As you guys can see back there, it's clear skies. So we went ahead and put some glaze on the roof here, and now it's time to sand. Now I also went ahead and grabbed some more body filler spreaders because I basically only have one left. I already threw away the other ones because, yeah, well, eventually they need to be replaced. So yeah, so I went ahead and went to O'Reilly's, I believe, to go get some. And well, let's go ahead and start sanding this glaze. All right, to knock down the majority of the body filler or glaze, I'm gonna go ahead and use my sander. This is my DA sander from Snap-on. A really good sander, but I think it's a little bit overpriced for what you're getting. To be honest, a couple people have asked me about the sander, and honestly, I would just, for the money, I would just tell you guys, go get a Dynabrade. You're gonna be much happier, and you're probably going to end up spending less. So I'm going to go ahead and use my DA to knock down all those high spots on this glaze. Now, I do want to mention that you could technically top coat this epoxy within a 2-day period without adhesion problems. Anything after those 48 hours, well, you're going to need to sand the whole thing. Now, as you guys can see, that epoxy primer is very nice and smooth because I hadn't sanded it before I put the body filler. Now, this is the case, the same case with the body filler. So if you wanted to put body filler on top of this glaze or right on top without sanding it, you would have to do it within the 48-hour period. Otherwise, you're probably going to end up with some adhesion problems if you do put, you know, quite a bit of body filler. So I will tell you that. Within this period, it's within 48 hours. Alrighty, guys, so I've been sanding diligently. Hang on one second. There you go. Let me show you how far I got so far and some of the issues that I've seen. And now I understand why a lot of people don't like to sand epoxy primer. This stuff is a nightmare to sand. But let me just go ahead and show you what I got so far. Alrighty, so far, so good. We do have a couple low spots. I went ahead and put some dry guide coat somewhere out there in the garage. I don't know where it's at right now. But anyway, I went ahead and applied some dry guide coat and then went ahead and sanded it with the DA. Not a block, but just a DA. And you could obviously see that there's some low spots here. There might be a high spot right there. Also, possibly a high spot right there. So we still got to address some of the dents right here in this area. I'm gonna go ahead and glaze this area again. Same with this one, but I'm also feeling around and it actually feels pretty good as far as all the rest of the dents go. I also went ahead and did the same thing on this side with the guide coat, and I'm also still working here on the front. Just started sanding this one before I recorded, so I'm not quite done yet, but it's starting to look real good. The only thing that I didn't like about the sanding the epoxy, which is pretty well known now, but as you guys can see, look how it clogs up your paper. And the only way I can get the paper to last long is by grabbing a wire brush like this one and pretty much scraping off the residual. Now this one's pretty bad, but I've been doing that to the other ones that I have, and that's basically how I'm making the sandpaper last, because if not, I'm gonna go through this whole freaking box just trying to sand the roof down. So yeah, it's kind of a nightmare to sand. But yeah, we're working on it. We're getting some work done. Starting to look real good. Let's go ahead and hop over to the other side. So here's the other side. I actually had a boo-boo here. When I put the epoxy, I actually went down, I touched it in this little corner, and the epoxy just looked all wrinkled. So I actually had to sand this back down. I'm actually going to be shooting another coat of epoxy again in this area. You can see that, well, the seals actually got some epoxy on it too. Wasn't too good of a tape job. Check that out. Yeah, that's my bad. But that's going to give me a second chance to really get under the molding as well and get a little bit of some bare metal areas that I see under the molding. So I'm going to try to buy some, there's some special 3M tape that kind of goes under the molding. It's kind of have like this plastic, I don't know what you would call it, but basically the plastic part kind of goes into the molding, and then you fold over the tape, and that kind of makes the seal fold over like that. But anyways, as we continue on, you can still see where we put some body filler on this side. We also have another low spot here, another little low spot there. So yeah, we're working diligently on the roof. I think it's going to turn out real awesome. Don't know if I just already stated this, but I am going to be shooting another coat of epoxy. But I will be sanding the whole thing and then recoating another shot of epoxy, because we do have some bare metal spots. A couple over there as well, and some on this little edge right here. So we will be shooting another coat of epoxy, and then we'll be able to shoot some high build primer on top of that. Maybe sand that down flat, or if the epoxy, the last coat of epoxy primer looks real nice and smooth, then I'll just go ahead and shoot base right over that and clear it. So that's the plan, but I'm gonna go ahead and continue sanding. And yeah, I'll cut you guys back in a bit. Guys, so it is basically several weeks later, and several weeks because I have really been not really feeling that great. And today I actually got my COVID shot, my second round of COVID vaccine. So yeah, I'm not feeling my best, but regardless, we're chugging along with the Honda Civic project car. So let me show you guys and update you guys basically what I've been doing behind the scenes. Alrighty guys, so here is the Honda Civic project car, and as you guys can tell, I went ahead and filled in any of our little dents that we had on the roof. Now there was some areas where I broke into the metal, as you guys can see right here. Quite a few different spots went down to bare metal, also over there on the other side, but I went ahead and already blocked this whole roof out, and man, it is pretty dang smooth. So we are going to be getting the primer ready, but first let me show you quite a few different mistakes and a couple things that I actually bought in order to kind of improve my painting, because well, there was quite a few mistakes that I did along the way when I shot the first layer of epoxy. So the first thing I ended up purchasing was the 3M perforated trim masking tape. And basically it is exactly what it's named. Basically what it does is it folds over the seal so that you have the ability to paint under that seal because, well, let me just show you the mistake that I made. I ended up painting the seal, as you guys can see right here on the front. I ended up spraying primer on the seal, and this was basically because the tape was having a hard time sticking, or at least the regular masking tape was having a hard time sticking to the seal. And when it peeled up, I went ahead and shot it, and well, it ended up spraying primer on those seals. That is okay, but unfortunately, this is a mistake. But the reason why I say it's okay is because we are going to end up replacing all the seals on the car. It gives it a much cleaner look, and also, well, since I've already since I've already painted over them, well, I'm gonna end up fixing them. And also some other seals are very, very dried out as well, so they're gonna need replacement anyway. But that's what I got the tape for, to hopefully ensure that I don't actually paint the seal again the second time around with the epoxy. All right, so after installing some of this 3M perforated trim masking tape, this is basically the results of what you get with this. So as I said, you put the plastic in between the seal, well, I would say the glass and the body of the car, and then you basically shove it in there and then fold over the tape, and then that basically folds over that seal so that you're able to get pretty much on the whole edge of the roof. So yeah, this is going to allow me to basically paint in between there, and then later on I'll just go ahead and peel off the tape, and then you'll get a nice a nice coverage of whatever coating you're going to be painting. In this case it's going to be primer, but in your case it might be paint or clear coat or whatever other coating you're going to be spraying. And here's a little side view for you guys. So that is what it looks like with this 3M perforated tape. Now let's go ahead and move on. All right, so we're moving on to the next step of the process, and it's basically going to be covering the car with plastic or sheeting. Now, I like to use the 3M sheets. I feel like they're the most durable, and also they're pretty easy to cut with a razor. So if you need to basically shape the plastic to whatever it is you're going to be spraying, it's not hard to cut, and it doesn't really tear. It actually cuts very nice and clean. With other ones that I have tried, they're a little bit harder plastic, and when you would try to cut them, it would actually tear the plastic to the point where you didn't really have a straight cut. Yeah, there was just some really cheap plastic. And also this is actually treated plastic, so it has one side is actually treated to actually keep the paint from peeling off of the plastic. Now, in some cases, you'll actually have paint that lands on the plastic and then will actually flake off, and that'll end up landing in your paint job. Well, with this stuff, it's actually treated so that you don't have that problem. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and just razor through this 3M plastic and shape it to the shape that I need it, and then go ahead and tape the edges. And here is basically what the job looks like completed, or at least the masking portion of it. And we're gonna go ahead and shoot some epoxy primer, because we do have some bare metal spots showing on the roof, and they're just a little bit too big to just go ahead and shoot some high build primer on top of that. So we're gonna go ahead and choose this Eurocam Oxy Stick epoxy primer. All right, so the next step in the process, we're going to be using this DeVilbiss D-Wipe Outs. And also, before I use that, I went ahead and wax and grease remove the roof already at this point. I just wasn't able to record that portion. Now, also the last step will be to use a tack rag to pick up any remaining dust or debris that might be on the surface of the roof. Now, I do like these D-Wipe Outs. What I like about them is they're really good for plastic. Now, these wipes are actually saturated in alcohol, and they also have some sort of formula to help with static. So it actually will remove static on a surface. However, the one thing that I didn't like about the D-wipes is it does leave a little bit of lint. Now you are able to blow it off, but in some cases I noticed that I'm gonna have to tack rag after that. Now usually with the D-wipes, that would be the last step in the process before you would go and shoot base and clear. But unfortunately in some cases, yeah, it just leaves a little bit of lint to the point where you have to either blow it or tack it in some cases just to get rid of that remaining lint from those wipes. But chemically, they work really well for getting rid of contamination and all that. So that is a great alternative. Now, for my primer, I'm going to be shooting it with the Tekna primer gun. Now, unfortunately, this is a discontinued gun at this point, but you guys can see how well it lays down that primer. Now, I wasn't able to record the first coat. This is actually the first coat at this point. Unfortunately, I just don't have enough memory on my phone to be able to record for a long period of time, unfortunately. So I had to kind of use a little bit of small short clips of me painting. And as you guys can see here, we already got our defects here. These are pinholes in the primer. Basically those pinholes are from the body filler that is underneath that primer. And basically, yeah, it was my mistake, obviously. But to be fair, I also got the same thing with the glaze as well. So I went ahead and glazed the front part of the car, and I ended up getting pinholes. Now, I ended up going a second coat before really getting into what to do with these pinholes, because I thought, well, maybe if I shoot another coat, it might fill in some of those pinholes, but unfortunately, they just kept showing up. So I kind of had to go back to the drawing board and kind of figure out how can I get rid of those pinholes and get this thing ready for, our next coats, whether that be high build primer or if I'm going to be shooting base and clear over this. But unfortunately, because of those pinholes, I wasn't able to go straight to base. I would have had to obviously shoot some high build primer as well on top of this because, well, we don't have a perfect surface to be able to top coat. So after shooting the second coat of epoxy, as you guys can notice there, I missed a very, very small dent. Now, at first I thought, it's no big deal, one little small dent, but it was really an eyesore. And then we're gonna go ahead and kind of get close to those pinholes. As you guys can see, there's quite a few of them. And yeah, it's quite the eyesore there. And we're gonna go ahead and move to the front part of it as well, so you guys are able to see what those pinholes actually look like. Now, I was able to kind of fix them on the fly with high build, but at this point right now, we're basically shooting epoxy. This is basically 2 coats of epoxy. And yeah, well, I ended up having to fix those pinholes with a glaze to try to fill in most of those pinholes. But as you guys can see here, other than that, the primer actually laid out pretty nice and smooth. But here in the front, I'll try to get close for you guys so you guys are able to see those pinholes as well. It's always something with paint, but you know, some of them were my mistakes, and well, hopefully you guys learn from my mistakes. If you get anything out of my videos, at least show you guys what not to do. But yeah, so anyways, I'm just gonna go ahead and let this epoxy cure, and then we're gonna go ahead and move on to the glaze portion. And like I said, we're gonna go ahead and use the USC Pro Glaze. Supposedly it's gonna be pinhole free, but as you guys saw right there, even the glaze ended up giving me problems with pinholes. After taking care of those pinholes with glaze, I'm gonna go ahead and shoot some Urchem polyurethane primer surfacer. So I'm gonna go ahead and stir it from the bottom, because obviously it likes to sit all the way at the bottom, so want to stir it very good. We're also going to be using the Tecna primer gun again in this video, but we're going to be shooting some primer surfacer. That is a step forward finally. Hopefully we don't get any more pinholes at this point, because it's been quite frustrating to going back and forth between primers and body filler and primer and, you know, bare metal. And yeah, this roof has been the most frustrating part of painting the car, just because, well, it had a lot of problems. For one, it had some sort of weird rubberized coating, then I had to go to bare metal, and then now it had a bunch of dents that I needed to take care of. And of course, at the very last step, when I think everything is going well, I end up getting pinholes. So at this point, I'm like ready to just shoot this primer surfacer, and I go ahead and start shooting it. And then I start to notice that, well, my pinholes are starting to come back. Now, this was actually 2 days later after I had already put on the glaze. So I thought, well, maybe the glaze isn't cured enough or something like that. I thought maybe there's a potential problem with it. But I'm also thinking that maybe the glaze is basically past its shell life, and it's basically coming to a point where it's separating, and therefore it's causing some sort of problems with pinholes. That's my best guess, because I usually don't get pinholes with this glaze. But as you guys can see here in the front, I went ahead, and this is actually glaze, but you could see some pinholes starting to show up in the primer surfacer, and right where we had our other pinholes on the roof. Those seem to not be so noticeable. I did notice a little bit, but the main ones that I noticed were in the front here. And yeah, so those were pretty frustrating. I had to go back to the drawing board. I had to think real quick. And so I ended up calling my buddy Oli Paints, which he was actually doing a live at that time. And I said, hey, really quick, do you have any tips on how to fix pinholes on the fly? And he's like, yeah, either dab it or dust some high build primer in there and get those pinholes filled, and then go ahead and lay down your coats of high build or primer surfacer at this case, and go ahead and, you know, whack it. So that's exactly what I ended up doing. I go ahead and put a second coat there, but on the pinholes on the front, I went ahead and just dusted them on. Dusted quite a few different layers of primer. I would say probably about 2 layers of primer in those specific areas where I was getting a lot of pinholes. And basically I filled in those pinholes with high build, or in this case, primer surfacer. And yeah, so it ended up working out for me at the end. But yeah, it was just pretty frustrating to see those pinholes pop out of my primer. So I ended up leaving you guys a little small clip of how I fixed those pinholes, and you can see I'm basically just dusting off that primer surfacer and just filling in those pinholes. Now I'm really focusing on that area where the pinholes are, and I also blow it dry just so that I could kind of see if it's actually filling. And as I go along, I'll end up adding a little bit more here or there, just depending on if those pinholes are actually getting covered or not. Then I go ahead and just blow off the remainder of the roof before I go ahead and put my last coat of primer surfacer on the roof. And I pretty much go pretty heavy on the last coat. I wanted to go ahead and just fill in a lot of basically the pinholes and any other remaining defect that might be on the roof of the car. So anyway, guys, so this is the last coat, and hopefully you guys enjoy.